That's Stacey Blackwood. I'm Clint Lamb, and this is Strength and Conditioning on the Cover Crimson YouTube channel. Stacey, haven't really got to talk to you too much, at least on the old airwaves, since Alabama's struggle win, even though it was like 42-16. A lot of people would describe it still as a struggle win. Before we move on to Wisconsin, which that's going to be the main topic of today, I do at least want to get your thoughts on the USF win, how you thought Alabama looked, what were some issues, what were maybe some potential solutions to those issues, kind of just what were your thoughts?
Well, it was sloppy for sure. I mean, in terms of penalties and turnovers, it went about as bad as you could imagine if you're an Alabama fan. And just from an execution standpoint or lack thereof, just it was kind of a frustrating game to watch for most of that contest up until the last 5 or 6 minutes when they kind of put the nail in the coffin and really started to burn up the South Florida defense and in the running game. And I guess the biggest takeaway is they need to get healthy on the offensive line, and they need to find continuity on the offensive line if this offense wants to become what they're capable of becoming, both through the air and on the ground. So don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but it was just an ugly game. Now they have an opportunity, I guess a get better week is the best way to look at it, and you better play much more improved than what you did last week on the road against a Wisconsin team. Or, if most of the time, if you have 13 penalties and you lose the turnover battle 3-0, you don't win those games too often. So fortunate, I don't want to say fortunate, because they were the better team and they executed down the stretch, which it's a 60-minute game for a reason. But you're not going to have that luxury, I guess is the best way to put it, if you play that way against a team like Wisconsin on the road. So ugly win, but a win's a win. And now you have some stuff to correct, and hopefully Coach DeBoer and his staff have done that this week. And like I mentioned, they just got to get healthy up front if they want to, continue to get better on the offensive side of the football.
Yeah. And this is kind of the week against Wisconsin, right? Where, Jake Chaney's going to be missing the first half. He's their best linebacker, their best defensive lineman, James Thompson. He's potentially out for the year. They might have officially ruled him out, but last time I checked, he was potentially. I know he's not playing in this game, but he's their best defensive lineman. I already thought that their defensive front was probably the biggest weakness of their defense. Secondary is pretty good, but Xavier Lucas, who's a true freshman, he's already played a lot of football for them. He went out last week when they were playing South Dakota State. Don't know his availability. He'll probably play if I had to guess, but I mean, I don't have a, super good idea one way or the other. If I had to guess, it would be like from the Wisconsin side. It's like, hey, we're pretty sure Caden Proctor's playing based off of how things are trending, but then you just never know. From our side, we're like, yeah, it's trending that way, but you just never know. But, so that's one of their key members of their secondary. So, it's interesting looking at this defense because they're going to have home field advantage. It's an 11 a.m. kickoff, so I don't think that the home crowd could be as advantageous as it would have been had it been like a night game or a 2:30 kickoff or something like that. But either way, when you're playing at Camp Randall, I mean, it's going to be a hostile environment. Those fans have been fired up to play Alabama, and, it's possible based off of the last couple of weeks that maybe they've been giving some extra attention to Alabama, and that might be why you saw – a 28-14 win over Western Michigan or a 27-13 win over South Dakota State. It might be like a New Mexico State-Auburn situation last year where I think we can all agree that Auburn spent a lot of extra time on Alabama. And then so they look terrible against New Mexico State, and then they look like a completely different team at home with that home crowd against Alabama. So I don't want to say this is going to be a cakewalk for Alabama by any means. But as far as on paper, Alabama matches up really well against them. Their defensive front, you talked about continuity with the offensive line, getting the offensive line healthy. I really do feel like that there are opportunities here for Alabama to establish a run game, really dominate as far as tempo and kind of clock and all those things, while also maybe continuing to have some of those explosives. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is like I mentioned, this is kind of a get right week for Alabama, and it's not just it's obviously team wide, but I'm more focus really on that offensive line and how they can kind of establish themselves this season, because they haven't yet. And a lot of that is due to injury. Caden Proctor not being out there has been an issue. Of course, the having to move Booker to left tackle last week, changed everything up. So it's been a roller coaster for the offensive line, and it's been an up and down season so far through 2 weeks. And so they have an opportunity this week against a Power 4 team, a team that's, like you mentioned, the defensive line's probably not the strength of Wisconsin. It's definitely not the strength of Wisconsin. And Alabama has a good opportunity to kind of, build some chemistry, build some continuity, try to figure out what their best five is. Is that Elijah Pritchett at right tackle? Is it Will Conformby at right tackle? I know people have been on him this week, but he's a young player who has a lot of potential. So what does the starting five look like? Is Caden Proctor back and healthy? Can they establish a good running game? Because I think that's key in this game, especially on the road. The road has not been kind to Alabama the last, 3 years. I think, from a national perspective, 11-3, I think, in their last 14 road games. They've won those games by an average of 10 points, but most of those games have been tight football games. They've lost 3. So the road has not been too kind to Alabama from a penalty standpoint, which is something that we saw a lot of last week at home. Does that translate again this Saturday in Madison, Wisconsin? So I want Alabama to focus on the details of shoring up the offensive line, establishing a strong rushing attack so that Milroe can kind of get comfortable in a game, because I don't know that he's really, even against Western Kentucky, the rushing attack was more of explosive type runs. So it would be nice to see those drives where you run it, 6 or 8 times on a 12-play drive, and you're getting 4 to 6 yards a pop. So just seeing that offensive line push some folks around and create some continuity and some chemistry is really what I'm looking for, really overall for this team, but especially on the offensive side of the football.
Yeah, and I saw somebody mention on one of our videos that they felt like that Jalen Milroe was not running enough. No. And I thought that was interesting because, he's got 22 carries on the season, but 4 of those have been sacks. So that's 18 carries. He's played 6.5 quarters of football. Because I don't remember exactly at what point he came out in the third quarter against Western Kentucky, but they had time to not only get Ty Simpson some action, but also get Dylan Lonergan some action too. So we'll just go ahead and say 6.5. If you do the math on that, I think he's averaging, over the course of a game, about 11 carries a game. So to me, that's like over 130 carries in a 12-game regular season. I feel like that's a really healthy amount, especially when you're trying to keep 2 running backs really involved. If it was just like a Dylan Johnson situation where, Washington really didn't have a second running back, I could totally see maybe you saying, hey, let's get him up there, 15 carries plus per game. But where, trying to keep 2 running backs, not just happy, but you want to utilize those guys. It's not really about keeping them happy. It's they're good players. Right. And then also you've got the passing game that you're wanting to utilize that I think they're going to continue to kind of, as guys get more comfortable, you'll see more and more of the passing game start to kind of shine through as Ryan Williams gets more experience, as Jalen Milroe starts getting more chemistry with both Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard. I just think that you'll start to see more passes and stuff as well. So I think they're running him enough right now. And it's, you got some design quarterback runs. You got some off script stuff that he's doing when things break down around him. So I don't necessarily know that more is better for Jalen Milroe than really what he's already doing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think going into the season, my expectations was, 10 to 12 carries per game would be about on the high side of what I wanted Milroe to take, because, and the biggest reason is because you don't want to take the ball out of Justice Haynes and Jam Miller's hands that many times throughout a game, because those are, and we've seen it through the first 2 weeks, they are home run hitters. They have the ability to take the top off the defense on the ground anytime they touch the football. So you want to make sure you feature those guys as much as possible, while also allowing Milroe, who may be the best athlete on the team, the ability to run the football from time to time, whether it's design runs or off script. And then, like you mentioned, you have to be able to involve your playmakers out wide. And we saw a more focused or more attention to Jeremy Bernard last week in South Florida than what we saw in week 1, which I think is a sign of to come as we move throughout the season, as he gets comfortable here in Tuscaloosa playing with Jalen Milroe and these other receivers. We see what Ryan Williams has the ability to do. I don't know. I think y'all mentioned how you've run out of adjectives to describe this kid, because he is just phenomenal. I mean, I don't know how to put into words how a 17-year-old kid can come into college football and already be one of the most explosive playmakers in the country. So just phenomenal to have him on the team. And then you still have guys like Kobe Prentice and Kendrick Law that you want to get them a couple touches a game, because they also have the ability to make explosive plays for you. So I don't want to get in a situation where, Milroe is, running it 15 times a game, and that is taking away from, Jeremy Bernard targets or Ryan Williams targets, or, Justice or Jam being involved in the running game as well. So I think that 11 number is I think that's an efficient number for Milroe this season.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, even though the sacks you're taking that out, that's still being applied to like his carries per game. So really, if you add the 4 sacks back, he's up there, on a per 4-quarter basis, I guess closer to 13 carries a game. So I think you're actually getting a little bit heavy on that. But if that's how you have to continue to win, that's fine. But I just don't think that bodes overly well for Alabama if that's how you continue to have to win. And that's not to say obviously Jalen Milroe's legs is the most dynamic part of Alabama's offense, period. And that includes the passing game with a guy like Ryan Williams. And the reason being is that Jalen Milroe's legs are a lot more consistent in the passing game. And just the opportunity to use that. You're not going to throw Ryan Williams, 11 to 13 passes a game, so it's like just the frequency in which you can use it. That's a huge element. But, at the same time, you kind of do what you have to do. So if you're in a situation where you're on the road, maybe the passing game ain't working, maybe it's Jalen Milroe's off a little bit, maybe the offensive line's still gelling, maybe it's receivers not being able to get open for whatever reason, and you got to rely on that. Hey, win however you need to. But I just don't think that should really be the design going in. And I guess we'll kind of have to wait and see. But, speaking of the offensive line, and, I do think you're right. It's hard because there's no defending the performance from Wilkin Formby. And that's what I feel bad about, because that's a kid that was trying his tail off. It was not a lack of effort. It wasn't laziness. He wants to do well for Alabama. It's kind of like, to an extent, it's kind of like Tyler Buckner last year against USF, where it's like, man, that kid didn't want to look that bad at all. And he worked hard all week trying to be as prepared as he could, but you can't defend the performance. It was bad. Yeah. And so, it makes you wonder, okay, I fully believe if he can get his confidence back and keep it, because what's one guy who's gone through this already? He's about to be back in Caden Proctor.
Right.
He caught quite a bit of flack last year. He started playing a lot better down the stretch. So Wilkin Formby, they're best friends. So he can look right across to the other side and say, hey, I've seen somebody go through this. And hopefully when Caden Proctor's back, and I'm not saying he's going to be perfect, but if you're seeing him perform well, overcome some of those, freshman season struggles, this is Wilkin Formby's freshman year, in my opinion. Right. Because he didn't play at all last year. So, he got a year in the system, but it's also a new system. It's asking different things of its guys. So, I just you feel bad, but what are your thoughts on, okay, let's say Caden Proctor's back this week, which isn't an automatic, but it's clearly, Kalen DeBoer said he's turned a corner. So we are thinking he's going to be back. I'm guessing it's going to be a rotation, right? At right tackle between Elijah Pritchett and Wilkin Formby. Who do you go with first? Do you stick kind of with what you plan going into the year, which, people forget this, and everybody's calling Wilkin Formby Alabama's second team right tackle, like they got their backup right tackle in. They announced him with the starters, which was that video had been made for Western Kentucky prior to Caden Proctor's injury. So the plan was for Wilkin Formby to be Alabama's starter. So you can't call him a backup. Don't do that. Stop doing that. But as far as would you go with Elijah Pritchett first? Would you, send out Wilkin Formby? What would you do?
Man, that's a loaded question, because I still have confidence in Wilkin Formby. I think he's going to be a good player. Last week, like you said, there's no excuse for what happened, but it just snowballed on him, man. It just, the one bad play, and after that, it was just a snowball effect. And, I know you talked about how, a couple of them were ticky-tack calls on him from a holding standpoint, but that's going to happen in a football game Well, I mean, officials ain't perfect either. So
Yeah.
you just got to live with it. So, but it did snowball on Formby, and there's a reason that he won. I don't want to say he won the right tackle spot in fall camp, but he, like you mentioned, he was announced the starter in week 1. So the coaching staff, at least going into the season, thought, regardless of what the variables were around that decision, was the starter at right tackle. So, I mean, I think it would be fair for him to be the starter again this week in Wisconsin, but I certainly wouldn't be surprised if Elijah Pritchett, trots out there with Caden Proctor being over at left tackle. I guess, to me, my gut would say I think you need to start Formby again and see what happens early on. Does he have confidence? Can he hold his own? But that leash would be really short. I don't think I'd carry that leash into late in the fourth quarter like they did against South Florida.
Well, I think that it's built in. Like, you don't have to worry about, hey, if we start rotating, like with Caden Proctor last year with Elijah Pritchett, it was kind of known. I mean, it's because Caden Proctor was struggling that Elijah Pritchett was getting opportunities. But this was Alabama's plan all along, to let these guys compete in some of these game situations at right tackle. And they haven't had a chance to do that. So it's already built in where, Formby's going to be expecting that. And so I think that, I think you do put Formby out there first, because I think it sends the wrong message to him. If you're trying to get his confidence back, if you bench him now, I don't know that that's necessarily the best thing. But if he struggles and then you rotate Elijah Pritchett in, it's like he's not going to think much. I mean, I'm sure he'll think of it some, but he's not going to think of it much, because that was the plan. Right. But then if Elijah Pritchett comes in and he's playing better, it's like at that point you kind of have your decision made, and you can clearly say, hey, and I'm not saying that Wilkin Formby won't get his opportunity to go back in. I'm sure they'll continue to rotate, but that's just part of it. But this is kind of one of those situations like after the 2020 season, where everybody is like, oh, I think Paul Tyson's going to beat Bryce Young for the starting quarterback job. And it's like, okay, you realize that as a freshman, he had leapfrogged Paul Tyson and was the number 2 quarterback, even though Paul Tyson was older. So like that's kind of sending a message. And Wilkin Formby is a year younger than Elijah Pritchett. And he was the first one. He got the first crack for the first snap of the season at that right tackle job. So while everyone expected it to be a rotation, clearly Formby had at the very least a slight edge, which I think it would probably be a little bit bigger than a slight edge, because if it's pretty much dead even, you're probably going to give the veteran the chance, the more, seasoned veteran and Elijah Pritchett, out of respect. So I just want people to keep that in mind. I think they're going to end up being fine at right tackle. I don't know if they're going to get elite play out of that position. And I will say I was really high on Wilkin Formby coming into the year. So far, I've been wrong on that, and I always want to own it when I'm wrong. Yeah. We'll see what happens from here. But I don't feel nearly as confident in getting excellent play out of right tackle as I was going into the year. I think they're going to get really good play at the other 4 spots once that gets settled in. And I think you get serviceable play out of either one of these 2 guys at right tackle before it's all said and done. And then by the end of the year, you might be getting much better play, and you might be in much better position, moving forward. But, anything else on the offense, as far as, you talked about the running backs, what did you think about the tight ends? Like, their role doesn't seem to be heavily there as far as the passing game, but I thought that really all these guys, or at least the top 2 in Dupree and Utes, did a really good job as far as their blocking. I saw somebody post and say, Clint, did you even watch the game? Robbie Utes didn't block nobody, kind of thing, or there were several plays. All right, so we're back. Had some technical difficulties, Stacey. Appreciate you hanging on with me. It was on my side. But we were talking about the tight ends and the comment that was made to me on YouTube, and just I wanted to get your thoughts. I felt like that the tight ends have been doing a really good job as far as their blocking, not really getting a whole lot of usage in the passing game. But what were your thoughts on how the tight ends performed?
Yeah, I thought both CJ Dupree and Robbie Utes have been pretty good, pretty solid for Alabama these first couple of weeks. Dupree especially, I think he is playing his best football since he's been at Alabama. And, Robbie Utes is a guy who's always been a really good blocker, especially out in space, maybe not quite at the point of attack like Dupree is, but I think I'm pretty pleased with what Dupree and Utes have done. It's considering what they've been asked to do so far, mostly in the blocking game and not so much in the passing game. And I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit surprised at how much 12 personnel Alabama's actually ran this season the first 2 weeks of the year. So that part is a little surprising to me.
Yeah, I feel like, and Oots to me, I mean, a lot of his blocking stuff this year, last year, I felt like he was kind of a better blocker in space, but being 270 pounds, man, that's tough, man. You can kind of dig guys out of there. He can still block in space. He can do so much. He's so versatile for your offense and just
Yeah.
the types of things that he can do. Not going to be a dynamic pass catcher. Not going to do a whole lot after the catch, but if you leave him open, he's going to catch footballs. And that's if it's just once or twice a game, and then it's once or twice for Dupree. I mean, I think most people would like to see the tight ends more involved in the passing game, but even if it's just that, you can kind of lull the defenses to sleep, and then you get a couple of key first downs, maybe in third down situations or second down or whatever, and keep drives alive, and maybe you get the occasional 15, 20-yard play, and just take advantage of your opportunities when they're there. But let's go to the defensive side of the football, because that's also interesting going against this Wisconsin offense. You got Tyler Van Dyke, the Miami transfer. I kind of mentioned yesterday, and it's not exactly the same, but just the feel of it. I don't remember, when was the kickoff for the Kentucky game last year? Was it an 11 a.m. kick or was it 2:30?
It was 11 a.m. Yep.
So yeah, that's what I thought. And so like the timing of it, the caliber of opponent, it kind of feels like Kentucky and Wisconsin are kind of similar. Transfer quarterback that kind of is still getting his footing, like Devin Leary last year. Granted, his receivers weren't really catching passes. They had a lot of drops before the Alabama game. But, I just thought that the completion percentage was similar. Devin Leary had actually thrown, I think, 4 touchdowns and like 2 interceptions. Van Dyke's thrown like 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. So we just hadn't done much. No explosive plays from Wisconsin's offense. It's all been kind of any success they've had, which granted, they're averaging 27.5 points a game. It's not a ton. They're trying to kind of usher in this new age of offense where they're kind of, Phil Longo's going to typically want to go tempo. He's going to be kind of air raid, kind of sling the football around. But this is such a contrasting thing. It's kind of like when Georgia Tech went from being the triple option to kind of getting with this, current era of college football, how much of a transition that was. It's not that extreme, but it kind of feels similar where there's some like growing pains within this offense.
Yeah, when you talk about Tyler Van Dyke, he is, he's a guy who a lot of people know the name, but he's really had an up and down career. Not, I think he's a good player, just not consistent. I don't think he's a game changing top player. And when's the last time? When you think of Wisconsin, you think of running backs. You go all the way back to like Ron Dane, you got Jonathan Taylor, all those great backs they've had. They don't have that type of player this year. And I don't remember the last time they didn't have a back or going to these and, hey, yeah, I know who the Wisconsin running back is. Even if you're just a casual college football fan, you know who the Wisconsin running back is. And that's not the case this year. Not that they're not good players or anything. They're just not to that level where they have NFL top potential. But, it's more of a by committee approach where they play 2 or 3 guys and they kind of share the workload. But I just, especially for Alabama's defense, this test, I think, is not quite as challenging as what South Florida presented, not just from I'm not talking about from a personnel standpoint, but schematically and, are they really going to be as up tempo? And, even though Phil Longo's trying to, implement that, like you mentioned, that's they're having to take baby steps doing this because it's such a contrasting style compared to what Wisconsin's always been, for our entire lifetime, basically, Clint. So, interesting to see what their game plan is, and do they use the up tempo more than what they maybe used the first couple of weeks, because that is that can cause problems for any defense, not just the Alabama defense. So what does this Wisconsin offense try to do to attack the Alabama defense? I think that's, one of the biggest questions I have going into this game. And you don't know because you're not in those game plan meetings with the Wisconsin coaching staff. But I do think from the quarterback situation, I think he's actually pretty similar to what Alabama saw last week, where he's kind of inconsistent with his accuracy. You don't know where the ball's really going. He has a tendency to overthrow some receivers or be off the mark and not allow his receivers to continue, hitting the receiver in stride and make plays explosively. So I just wonder if Wisconsin will have enough offense to make this game a tight game down the stretch. It's on the road, but I don't trust Van Dyke enough, if I'm just talking realistically, to be that type of guy who can, throw it 35 times and beat Alabama down the field on a consistent basis to really put this Alabama defense, on their heels.
Well, I mean, he's been at his best, in my opinion, when he's been able to operate in an up-tempo offense.
Yeah.
And you haven't seen that in the first 2 weeks. So I agree with you. I wonder if they're going to go more up-tempo, if maybe they've been saving it a little bit, or kind of what the deal is with that. But, that's something to kind of keep an eye on. Their offense in general, just like I said, 0 explosive plays so far. It feels like, they got some good receivers, but I don't feel like it's kind of like comparing it to like Alabama, a couple of years ago, where, and maybe to some degree last year, but it's like that 2022 group where it's like they're good on paper. They should be better, but for some reason they're struggling to separate. Like there's just not a whole lot available for the quarterback when you really look at it from the all 22. And the problem with that is, how does Wisconsin overcome some of that stuff?
Right.
And that's what I kind of, if you don't have a Jalen Milroe style of quarterback, which granted, a couple of years ago they didn't, but they had Bryce Young, and Bryce Young could really extend, make some things happen, give his guys some time to get open. And that really helped. And in some ways they had to carry the offense that way. And I just don't know, Van Dyke is more mobile than he's given credit for. He will run on you. He can extend some plays. I feel like he's been holding on to the football a little too long, on a lot of occasions. But, I will be curious to see if they decide to go tempo, especially with the way that Alabama struggled with it at times against USF. Now, here's the thing. USF has mastered the up-tempo offense. Their pacing is on a completely different level than really anything Alabama's going to see, other than maybe a couple of teams, but certainly not Wisconsin. So if it is up-tempo, I don't think it's anything that Alabama can't manage. But it's just, when you really look at some of like the key pieces, like, okay, Milroe's kind of been, trying to get comfortable. Can you make him uncomfortable? And then you look at Wisconsin's defensive front. It's like, well, they've really struggled to generate pass rush. If you're going to do that, you got to be able to have a lot of early down success, earn the right to get after the quarterback and Jalen Milroe. And then you look at their, run defense, the fact their front seven is not great, especially when you take Jake Chaney out for a half and you take James Thompson out, for the entire game. So then it becomes, okay, can you really have that early down success to put pressure on Alabama's offense? To me, it feels way more like if Alabama struggles, it's going to be because of Alabama. And that is a very real possibility, because we've kind of been seeing that. And that's kind of been a theme the last couple of years. So, we'll have to wait and see how it ends up playing out on Saturday. But just when you look at it on paper, and paper does not matter when that ball kicks off, it matters zero. Right. But on paper, that to me, there's no reason why Alabama shouldn't be able to do to them, kind of what they did to Kentucky last year. But if they can avoid the muff punt and things like that, where you hand momentum to Kentucky for a while, I mean, it could be an even bigger route.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a really good example of what this game could be like, because Kentucky and Wisconsin, or Kentucky of last year and Wisconsin of this year, are really, really similar teams for the reason you've already mentioned. And so I really like that kind of a analogy you're using there. And I think, and we talked about this over at covercrimson.com, how important it is to get off to a fast start. That doesn't just mean the offense either. That's the defense too. That's getting after Van Dyke, forcing some mistakes, whether it's, a penalty or a sack or an interception. Just, put the game on Van Dyke's shoulders, I think, to make him uncomfortable. And that's that I think if they can do that early in the contest, that's a really good, because they done that against Kentucky last year. If you remember, I think it was Braswell got a sack on the first series, and Turner comes in, and I think Tresman Marshall got in there or something. So it was just a by committee approach of getting after the quarterback, being aggressive. Justin Boybe was big in that game as well against Kentucky. So, and we've seen so far these first 2 weeks that guys like a Quay Russaw, a Quindarius Robinson, a Tim Smith, a Tim Keenan, who's playing out of his mind, can get after the quarterback and make plays in the backfield, get some tackles for loss. So if you can do all those things early, like you did in that Kentucky game last year, that's a really good recipe for Alabama, and just kind of like get out of your own way. Don't commit the foolish penalties. Don't turn the football over. Don't muff a punt, which is, you think about it, Cole Adams is probably not going to play. He's been the primary punt returner. Now you're probably going to send Mbakwe back there, who's fielded a couple already this season and has looked comfortable doing it. But when you're finally the guy, what does that change anything? So that's an important thing to watch out for too. So I just think starting fast defensively is really big in this game. Do not allow Wisconsin to get confidence in this game on offense early, because I think Van Dyke's one of those guys who, if he gets going early, that's not a good sign for you throughout the ball game.
Yeah, he's been one of those guys when he's on, and
Yeah.
he can be pretty damn good. But when he's off, he's not very good at all. And so
Right.
yeah, the quicker you can frustrate him, kind of get him in kind of that bad game mindset, I think he's going to carry you with that. I've very rarely seen him come out kind of flat, not be performing well, and then turn it around mid game.
Right.
So that's going to be absolutely huge. And it's like against Kentucky, they took the crowd out of it early. I mean, that crowd was already, like you mentioned and confirmed, it was an early game. Alabama came out with energy. They started dominating really on both sides of the football, and it immediately kind of took the crowd out of it, and they could weather that storm when things started to go wrong, because they had established such a lead, and they were physically dominant, and they were kind of just controlling every aspect of the game. And so, if you can do that early enough, even if you get a Jake Janey back in the second half, and maybe he's enough of a playmaker to start slowing down some of the things that Alabama was having success doing in the first half, by that point, is it too late? And so, I look at this game, and it's like I was talking about with their defense and kind of making Milroe uncomfortable. If you look at Alabama's defense, okay, it's young secondary in some places. Can we exploit that? And it's like, you look at Tyler Van Dyke, you look at the fact their receivers have kind of struggled. If they had been a dominant passing attack, then it's like, okay, this is an area where you look, and on paper, Wisconsin can cause Alabama a lot of issues. You don't see that on paper on either side of the football. So it all comes down to, that doesn't mean that Alabama gets to step on the field and it's an automatic victory. Far from it. You still got to play the game. And I will say there's been times in the past, Auburn and the Iron Bowl. I know that's different, but, where it's like, there's no reason Alabama shouldn't wear these guys out. And next thing you know, it's 2 overtimes, or it's, 4th and 31, and you're throwing up a prayer, So, on paper, it only means so much, but this is an opportunity, and we haven't, I guess we did see it from Alabama last year on the road against Kentucky. But it's kind of one of those, you have that really long period where just things weren't going well again, right?
Yeah.
Where, so you'd like to see them come out, take advantage of their opportunities on paper where they should be winning, win those areas, get a dominant victory, get out of there, and get to the bye week, hopefully healthy, or healthier than you've been, or get out of this game without any extra problems with health. And then, you can kind of regroup for Georgia. But that's, I guess a little bit easier said than done.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And this week, I know I mentioned it a couple of times at the start of this. It's a get right with Alabama, because they've shown they're capable of being a really, really good football team, as good as basically as good as anybody in the country. They have the talent, they in the right places to be an elite team this season. But you have to take care of the details. You have to get healthy, first of all, on the offensive line, and find out who your best 5 guys are, especially with Georgia looming. Tennessee's a good football team. LSU's always a tall ass. You got to play Oklahoma. There's a lot of talented SEC teams coming on the schedule, so you got to get right before then on the offensive line. And then you have to correct the mistakes, whether it's pre-snap or post-snap with the penalties. And this is just an opportunity for Alabama to go on the road and correct those things, because they're all correctable. There's not one thing that went wrong against South Florida that you can't fix. So get those things fixed. It's not like they're getting pushed around. They're not getting manhandled. It's not like they have a deficiency in talent. They have all that. Just correct the things that you can correct. Hold them to the football. Don't have careless mistakes, whether it's in the pre-snap or in the post-snap from a penalty standpoint, and just take care of the little things. And I think if they do that, they can come out of Wisconsin with a win. They can, like you said, hopefully stay healthy or be even healthier going into that bye week and getting ready for Georgia here in a couple weeks, because that's when most fans around college football are really going to be paying attention to this Alabama team. I know it's a big game in Wisconsin this weekend, but I think most people feel like Alabama's the better team and should go on the road and beat Wisconsin. And from a casuals fan perspective, the season don't start till September 28th when Kirby Smart and Georgia roll into Tuscaloosa, and it's a different feel in that game because Nick Saban's no longer the coach. So don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but Alabama, like you mentioned, and on paper don't mean much, but they should go into Wisconsin and take care of business as long as they do the things that they're capable of doing.
Yeah, and this Wisconsin game, to an extent, and we're about to wrap this thing up. I know we've been going kind of long, but it does feel like, to an extent, the same as the past 2 weeks, where it's like it can't really help you too. Even though it's Wisconsin, it's a Big Ten team. I feel like if Alabama goes in there and dominates, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people will be singing their praises a little bit.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I feel like it's going to be like, oh, you did what everybody expects you to do.
Yeah.
And, Wisconsin wasn't very good. Look at Western Michigan. Look at South Dakota State. They won by, they could only win by 14 in both of those two games. You should go in there and kill them. It can go very wrong for you, though. And that's kind of what USF was as well, where it's just like USF's a tough team. They're better than the helmet. I'll tell you that. A lot of people are going to look and say, well, they've been terrible in the past. Just a couple of years ago, they were awful. They've never had historically a really great program, but that's a different football team, in my opinion, this year. And I wouldn't be shocked off if they struggle the next couple of weeks, because it is kind of the Alabama effect. I could see them kind of, being super close against Bama, kind of post Bama. We've seen that with other teams too, where it just kind of lingers. You had your chance to really pull off what a lot of people viewed as impossible. But my point with this game is it's kind of, the same way. So that's why you have to just go out there. You've got to handle your business. You're not going to be called the greatest thing ever if you dominate, even though I do think just going on the road, these were the types of games against Mississippi State last year, a bunch of games the last few years where you should probably go on the road. And even though it is a road atmosphere, you should dominate. You didn't do it. You didn't play a clean game. Even the Kentuckys of the world, who you kind of handled, didn't play an overly clean game for 4 quarters. And so you would like to see that. And I think that would be a really good sign. But even if it doesn't, just everything doesn't look perfect, pay attention to the offensive line, pay attention to the penalties, pay attention to the turnovers, and just see if those are heading in a positive direction. Because if those things are improving, they're creating rushing lanes, they're playing off of that well. Milrose seeing some stuff. They're taking advantage of more opportunities offensively, defensively. They're stopping the run well, forcing it on a Tyler Van Dyke's shoulders. They're getting some sacks in those obvious passing situations. The defense is opportunistic and taking advantage of their turnover opportunities. If you're seeing all those kind of things, it's rolling in the right direction. So it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm not saying that it does, but you would just like to see them play good football and not really be, me and Chris talked about it yesterday in the stock up, stock down, and he said that Alabama's been like a lack of focus, and I didn't agree with that point. I don't really feel it's a lack of focus, but stop coming off like it's a lack of focus. At the very least, some perceive it that way. So, be dialed in, lasered in, and doing the little things right. And I think good things will happen. Stacey, you got anything else before we hop out of here?
No, to your point, I agree. I don't think it's a lack of focus, but I would say the first 2 games, like the way I would put it, there's just been moments throughout the games where there was just too much chaos. Like Alabama's got too good of players. They got too good of staff to have that much chaos. They just need to clean it up and play what they're capable of playing. And if they do that, they'll be fine this Saturday in Madison, Wisconsin.
Absolutely, man. All right, this has been fun talking a little Alabama, Wisconsin. Also dabbled a little bit with Alabama, USF. Always good talking to you, Stacey. We'll be doing some stuff next week for the bye week for sure. That'll be more turning it back towards Alabama a little bit, being a little bit more reflective, being a quarter of the way through the season. We appreciate everybody who has been listening in. We appreciate you way more than you know. We're trying to grow this channel. That means you guys. As much as we get on here and talk about content and all these different things. It's the audience that drives everything. And so we appreciate the likes, we appreciate the shares, the comments. You know, we have been super busy, but I'm getting back in the habit of really addressing a lot of those comments on YouTube, having a presence over there. So we appreciate all those. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That helps us more than anything. And go subscribe at covercrimson.com. It's only $1 for the first month. And we've got a lot of these conversations happening over there. Stacey, as always, I appreciate you, buddy. And we will do this again next week.